I had an experience, excuse me, um, that started on December 11th. My daughter and my son-in-law went to the ER, got tested for COVID because my son-in-law was coming down with, well, body aches that were not normal. Um, they tested positive. That afternoon, I tested positive, both on the quick test, and then 2 days later, the PCR came in. Uh, and of course, because of my obesity, I'm not diabetic, but because of my overweight and my sedentary lifestyle, basically sitting in the dark for years, waiting for my wife to need some help. My daughter, being the ER nurse, provided me with a pulse ox for my finger and a thermometer for my mouth. And every 2 hours, she was monitoring my vitals. Well, about maybe 4 days later, my wife didn't have any symptoms. My daughter had very minor symptoms. My son-in-law's very difficult process at home with my daughter taking care of him. And I just was sitting there. My wife noticed that my breathing wasn't quite right and I wasn't moving quite as well. And she called my daughter, who lives in De Leon Springs, and she came over and right through the doors, took one look at me and called 911. The ambulances were here in Hidden Hills within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and I was whisked to the ER. I went into the ER, and of course, we're coming toward Christmas, and Christmas was kind of always a fun holiday for me because I used to work for a company that did all the Christmas carols at Disney and major hotels. We were all in costume, the whole 9 yards. So as I'm being processed, I said to one of the nurses, "Sweetheart, can I sing you a Christmas carol? Because I know you're not going to have a lot of Christmas." So of course it was chestnuts roasting on an open fire and another 2 or 3 of those. And by the time I had finished singing a couple of quick Christmas carols, the doctor came in and said, "You're going to the ICU right away." Well, 7 days later or so, my body was gray, my lips were blue. They were about to put me on a ventilator. And of course, my daughter stepped in and said, "No, that's not what my father wanted." He was very specific, which I was. I did not want to go on a ventilator because I knew exactly what that would mean. But at this point in time, I was under so many medications and I was not cognizant of what was going on. For those of you who haven't had a personal experience with this, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because, and I don't mean to mitigate the number of folks lost. At that time, it was a little over 400,000, and now it's close to 600,000. But we have 33 million Americans, and a lot of folks just hadn't been affected by it in a direct way. So the purpose of my talk is to make it personal, to give you 2 things of advice that could save the life of people you love, including yourself. And because this particular pandemic is not going to be the last we have, most likely. But I digress. On December 23rd was when I was most dire. I had received the president's cocktail, even the veterinary medicine they do for heartworm for dogs or cats that supposedly helps hike your immune system. And I was having difficulty doing something called proning, which is basically lying on your stomach and chest with pillows raising you a bit to allow your body to, your to allow your lungs and your body to spread out as much as possible. I couldn't get through it because, quite frankly, I had a terrifying experience when I was younger, uh, where I rolled on my stomach and my face went into a pillow and I couldn't breathe and I couldn't move. And that panic and that fear was something that I could not overcome. Well, that night on the 23rd, the nurse said, look, I know you can hear me. I know you know what to do. But if you don't do it tonight, tomorrow you're going on the ventilator no matter what, because you're on 100% oxygen. We've done what we can do. Well, I have to tell you, I'm a deeply spiritual person. And the creator of the universe reached out and touched me. There were thousands of people who were doing prayer chains and sending healing flows as well. And I believe in remote prayer and remote healing, having experienced it. On December 24th, I proned for 9 hours and had a massive turnaround. Now, of course, my older brother, who is a scientist, an OBGYN of renown at Harvard Medical, said, Steven, the fact that you've been singing all your life, you've been teaching people how to diaphragmatically breathe all your life, your body muscles, your sense memory took over. And I told him, well, the creator of the universe made it possible for me to develop that. So he didn't have an answer for that. Lo and behold, maybe a day and a half, 2 days later, they're rolling me out of the ICU. And before they even really started to move me much, I kind of sat up and I said, oh, what's going on? I was coming out of the anesthetic pretty quickly. And if you've ever come out of anesthetic on an outpatient surgery, you know, you sit up and you go, okay, doc, I'm ready for the procedure. And that's the way I felt, renewed. And then when they told me I was going to the isolation wing, I knew I was getting better. And of course, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, I've got sunshine on a cloudy day. When it's cold outside, I've got the month of May. And everybody in the ICU, the workers, of course, started to smile, laugh, clap, cheer, because they knew somebody was getting better. Now, of course, the ICU is down low in the hospital, and I had to go across the hospital and up to the second floor. So, of course, I did other songs along the way. And by the time I got to my room, all of the nurses had heard me sing. And for the next week or so, I spent that time singing 45 minutes on, 15 minutes off. And a couple of things happened when I got to that room. Judy, you mentioned that pit of despair that I had been living in for so long. There was an anger that I felt at myself for allowing myself to be caught in that deep hole, and promised myself I would never, ever go down there again, that I had come through that kind of fire. And in the process as well of realizing that, I also realized that I had, well, my faith had, I won't say lapsed, but just I hadn't really expressed it. So, of course, along with all the pop songs and country western and all the different genres I've sung over the years in Broadway. Uh, I started singing in Hebrew, and the nurses might come in, and as I'm doing this, I go, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuso Leolam Vaed, which is the Shema in Hebrew. So, of course, the nurses would say, that's really beautiful, but what language is that? I explained to them that I was Jewish and brought up in the American Reformed faith. And the basic English translation of that is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, creator of the universe, with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be upon thy heart. Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. Thou shalt speak of them when thou sittest in thy house, when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. They shall be for frontlets between thine eyes and upon thy hands. They will be a sign upon your doorposts and your gates, that you will remember and do unto my commandments, and be holy unto the creator of the universe. And I sing the Shema now twice a day. It reminded me of where I came from, the strength of my family. Speaking of community and family, here in DeLand, we have a temple on Route 44. They had been taking care of bringing meals to us prior to me even getting sick. And have been incredible. They took care of meals for my wife while I was away for 30 days between the hospitalization and rehab. Now, as I mentioned before, there were two things I wanted to make sure that anybody here heard, okay? I mentioned proning. Please, if you've ever had any difficulty laying down on your bed, on your stomach, or you know anybody that you love, make sure they practice it a couple of times a week. Just get comfortable. It's something that, if God forbid they get into a situation like mine, it's going to be a big change in how their care goes and how they're able to fight off these types of respiratory problems. The other thing is to learn how to diaphragmatically breathe. And you'd think that that should be a very simple thing, but it's not. Most people, when they think they're going to take a deep breath, raise their shoulders, constrict their lungs, and don't get a deep breath. I can teach you how to sing in 30 seconds. Diaphragmatic breathing is very easy to understand. All you have to do is lie down on the floor or on your bed. Hopefully it's a relatively firm mattress. Put your hands like this, flat on the floor next to you. Put your feet flat on the floor so your knees are at a bent angle. From that position, you can only breathe diaphragmatically. And that will allow you to expand your lungs further and further and breathe deeply, and just go in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if you practice it for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, you're going to feel the muscles, lowest muscles in your back especially, start to go down into the floor. That could save your life in a situation like this. Now, the strength of family is incredible as well. I put my daughter in an awful position On the 23rd of December, she had to make phone calls to my brothers and my sister and our extended, my cousins and everybody, telling them that they were going to have to make arrangements for a memorial service. That it was how serious things were. And I regret that that happened, but I also, in coming through this, have come into a different stage of life. I rely more on my daughter, as she relied upon us when she was young, to take care of Dad. There was a time in my life while I was taking care of my wife where I said to my brothers and sister, you know, what happens when I need to be taken care of? Who's going to be around for that? And my daughter and my son, who lives in Deltona, stepped up incredibly. And I mentioned community. Thank goodness for Facebook. Okay. I know that a lot of folks may not like it, but there is a childhood chat room from my town from the 60s and 70s. And my wife, my daughter, my sister, Jackie, they all posted what was going on with me, that I was in the hospital, that things were very serious, and that we needed financial support. Well, they started a GoFundMe page, and hundreds of people donated to that. And most of them were my elementary school, junior high school, and high school friends, and people that I hadn't spoken to in decades, who remembered me as the kid in elementary school that took care of everybody else. It was always this big bear of a guy. And they said, I've got to help Steve. And it gets me emotional just thinking about it, because there are so many, I couldn't thank them all. But I know that if I get to a reunion that I'm going to have with my sisters and my brothers in late July, that about 15 people from my high school class are going to be driving from New York City and upstate New York to this party that originally was just supposed to be with just a couple of families. It's now grown to a huge event. And I can't wait to hug folks. I've always been a big hugger, and I'm so happy I'm going to be able to do that as well, because everybody's going to be vaccinated. I haven't really kept track of the time I'm speaking here, but I do want to thank you all so much for allowing me this time. The new me, in terms of that despair, no longer exists. That's something that is a chapter that's been closed. My relationship with my wife has gotten so much deeper as well through this process. But please, learn to breathe correctly. Make sure that you can, in fact, be comfortable proning. Take good care of yourself, because the creator of the universe is out there and has lots of positive things for all of us to keep doing. Thank you.